I lent her my only winter coat for an exam. And 6 years later, she designed storm shelters that don't fail. My name is Keir Halden. I used to count courage by touch. A button from my coat, nicked into a little crescent where the metal met a door frame the night I couldn't sleep. When fear got loud, I'd roll that crescent until the noise found its edge. Finals week. A wind that made door hinges pray. I was late. Lungs tight from cheap heat and cheaper coffee, coat zipped to the throat. At the exam hall, a girl stood with a pencil and no coat. Tali Verdan. I'd seen her once in the library tracing load paths in the margins of a newspaper. She shook like a bridge that hadn't learned its own rhythm yet. They said no hats, no scarves. She laughed, teeth a little blue. Cold is not on the rubric. Inside my sleeve, a red thread had worked loose from the cuff. My mother's hands had sewn that coat 10 winters ago and taught me the hold-fast stitch. Make a square, cross the lines, pull just until the fabric breathes. I unzipped. Will you bring this back? I asked, already shrugging out of warmth. Tali tried to protest and lost to the wind. I showed her the red thread at the cuff. This is a hold fast, I said. It's how you tell a seam to fail soft, not snap. I tied the thread into a tiny square on her glove. Find the safe line in everything, even questions. She slid into the coat like a promise. The exam officer held the door. I watched warmth and my grade walk away together. I made it to the bus stop and learned what cold does when it is sure of itself. By evening, my lungs sounded like paper being folded too many times. Attendance docked. Interview missed. A text from my father. Principals don't heat a room. Under the blanket, I felt for the crescent-nicked button. Metal keeps its own weather. It was colder than I wanted and exactly as honest as I needed. People think kindness is clean. It leaves threads everywhere. Tali passed, barely. She kept the red thread in her wallet under a plastic sleeve. A little square knot that looked like a compass. She failed her next big studio review because the roof fence sang the wrong way in crosswind. She spent nights on storm cleanup crews, hands raw from tarps, listening to what broke first and how the sound changed right before it did. She learned that joints should have a way to say enough without turning into gone. She tested cross-lacing that spreads a hit across many hands. She mapped pressure relief paths so seams could breathe like ribs. She made a rule, designed for the moment after failure. When a hurricane chewed through the coast and our inland city caught the tantrum, Tali was there. Not on TV, but in the mud, hearing a shelter make a sound that was both apology and warning. Meanwhile, I collected smaller weather, bronchitis that learned my address, night shifts at the copy shop where the machines made snow from paper, a degree that kept almost happening. I volunteered at the library on Thursdays and watched people carry the world out in stacks of books they could return. The coat? I stopped waiting for it. Some gifts shouldn't come back if they're doing their job. I kept the button. It had come free during a laundry saga, and walked with it in my pocket like a tiny moon you could hold. Years hinged forward. A call went out. Storm shelter redesign, public proposals. The city had buried too many names. Insurance talked louder than sirens. Tali and a scrappy team built Roomline, a modular shelter system with panels that clipped like sentences and fail-graceful seams that refused to tear straight. They made a demo kit in a borrowed warehouse with a coffee machine that frothed out of grief. The first wind test tore their straps. The second buckled a joint where 1,000 videos would later pause. Tali turned every failure into a diagram and wrote, by hand, at the bottom, "Try again. Try slowly." She pinned the red thread above the workbench. When the night felt like a long hallway, she touched it and remembered the hold fast. Make a square, cross the lines, pull until the material decides it can live there. Then the city called. Live wind tunnel demo, news cameras, procurement officers in bright vests, funding for the design that held. On the morning of the demo, everything not nailed down tried to leave. Wrong bolts delivered, a mislabeled crate. The envelope with the hold-fast annotation card, the exact cross-lacing pattern, went missing in the scramble. A gust hit the test rig. A seam started to whisper. Tali's eyes looked for a memory and found only the shape of it. She moved to the edge of the floor where the noise was a little less confident and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Keir? It's Tali. There was a stitch, a square. I can't see it. I'm outside, I said before I knew why I was. Open the side door. The side door sticks in old buildings. You learn which hip to use. I walked in with my volunteer badge from the library, my breath figuring itself out. Tali didn't recognize me. Why would she? I had been a morning, not a person. On the table sat a paper cup with a wrinkle in it, a failed seam pretending to be empty. I took a red thread from the kit spool and the paper cup into my hands. I turned the crescent-nicked button in my fingers until memory clicked. The stitch, I said softly for both of us. Make a square, cross the lines, pull, until the material decides it can live there. I pushed the thread through the cup, 4 holes in a box. Then the cross, top left to bottom right, top right to bottom left. I pulled only until the wrinkle softened, not until it screamed. That, I said, is your hold fast. Tali's throat made a sound like a room learning to be quiet. Again, she said. We did it on a sample panel, then on another. The strap lay down the way a frightened animal lays down when it realizes the hand is learning. The procurement officer cleared his throat in the language of schedules. The cameras blinked impatiently. Tali stepped to the rig. She took the mic and said, "We're going to let the seam breathe." She ran the hold fast through the joint herself, hands steady because they had shaken enough. The wind climbed the scale. The panel bowed like a listener. The cross-lacing spread the hit. The seam said enough, and then we're still here. Engineers don't usually cheer. They nodded the way people nod when something true finally arrives. The city signed the papers that afternoon. Roomline rolled out across schools, clinics, parks, shelters that didn't brag, just held. Months later, during a storm that turned noon into dusk, I walked past a school gym humming with generators. Kids sat on wrestling mats, drawing their houses with extra lines where roofs met walls. Tali stood by a panel showing a cross-section of the seam. She had pinned the red thread in a little frame under the diagram. She didn't see me. She didn't need to. At the far end of the gym, a seam made a small sound, the kind that used to mean soon. This time, it meant safe. I put my hand in my pocket and pressed the crescent-nicked button into my palm. Metal, cold, honest. When the storm thinned and the lights returned, no one clapped. Something better happened. People exhaled and did not count heads twice. We walked out into air that had forgiven us for a minute. The shelter walls kept their quiet promise. And if you looked close where panel met panel, you could see it. A red line crossing itself into a small square. A seam that failed softly so people didn't. A stitch that said, in a language fabric could understand, "Stay."